Bueno, tenemos, primero voy a sacar mis notas. Bueno, tenemos la suerte y sin duda el privilegio de contar con nosotros para abrir esta jornada con Sir Julian King. Es un privilegio para nosotros y un gran honor y estamos muy agradecidos a Julian por su generosidad y su presencia aquí. Julian King es uno de los grandes diplomáticos del Foreign Service británico, de esa generación que además de formarse en una universidad británica de referencia, pasaron por la ENA, por la École Nationale de la Administración, lo cual ha dado lugar a un funcionario híbrido que hay otros ejemplos muy brillantes en el servicio civil británico. Julian ha tenido una larguísima y fructífera carrera en el Foreign Office. Él ha estado destinado pues, prácticamente en todos los sitios, porque ha estado destinado en París, en La Haya, en la OTAN, en Naciones Unidas. Pero de 2004 a 2007 la carrera profesional de Sir Julian empieza a aproximarse a lo que ha sido uno de los elementos tradicionales o trascendentales en esa carrera, que es la de acercarse a los temas relativos a la seguridad y a la defensa. De 2004 a 2007 es el representante permanente del Reino Unido en el Comité de la Unión Europea de Seguridad y Política. Luego fue jefe de gabinete de que, como todos ustedes saben, son los que mandan en la Comisión Europea, de dos comisarios británicos, bien distintos, por cierto, como Mandelson y Lady Ashton, y luego fue embajador en Irlanda y Francia. Y de 2016 a 2019, pues Julian fue el comisario europeo de Seguridad, donde ya pues, se ha convertido a partir de entonces, ya lo tenía en su trayectoria, como una de las personas más conocedoras de los desafíos y del mundo geopolítico y de la ciberseguridad, y además ha pasado a los anales como el último comisario británico de la Unión Europea, que siempre es una situación difícil, incluso doméstica, porque Julian está casado con una danesa que además es alta funcionaria de la Unión Europea. Ahora Julian sigue muy activo, tiene muchas actividades, pero solo voy a destacar una, que es en la que coincidimos, y es que es Senior Advisor de Flint Global, que es una consultora británica de referencia en el mundo de las políticas públicas. Julian, thank you very much again for being with us. And let me start with a question related to the situation of how is the global politics and which are the geopolitical tensions. What do you see the current geopolitical situation of the world?
So let me start by thank you very much for inviting me to this remarkable venue. Apologies, I'm going to speak in English, but if we do Q&A, then we can have questions in Spanish or English as people prefer. I'm very glad to be here because I'm very supportive of the objectives of the foundation and of the report that you're producing today, because I think it's incredibly important that we promote dialogue and discussion about these subjects, that we promote, in particular, a fruitful dialogue between the public sector and the private sector. I've been involved in a bit of that in the United Kingdom. You're doing it here very effectively, if I may say, with an even stronger private sector lead. And I think that's very important when you think about how much of what we're talking about is held in private sector hands. And I think that, as one of your presentation slides underlined, there's a real need to try and spread the culture of thinking about these subjects. So I'm very, very supportive of all of that. But you've suggested that to start the discussion, we take a kind of step back and look at the geopolitical backdrop to this set of challenges. And I'm very happy to do that. There's an enormous amount going on. The Russian invasion Ukraine, the return of large-scale war to the European continent, in the Middle East, in Asia, in the Asia-Pacific region. Security has come back onto the agenda of some of the big meetings, international meetings that are taking place in Asia this week at ASEAN and APEC. We could talk about some of those things if you want, but I thought I would just, without wanting to avoid those subjects, some of them which are politically sensitive, I'd just pause for a moment and talk about two trends which I think are very important when we're thinking about the overall security context, including for cybersecurity. And they're kind of linked. The first trend is, and you've underlined it in your title and in your first slide on the context, that is the really striking increase in the fragmentation of the international system. There is much less shared sense of common endeavor on a whole range of global challenges. And that fragmentation is taking a particular form. It's increasingly breaking down into blocks, largely geographical blocks, not always exclusively. Sometimes they're geographical mixed with ideological blocks, but we are seeing, and this is going to pose some interesting challenges for Europe, we are seeing, obviously under this US administration, a conscious focusing on their interests, including their national and their regional interests, a renewed Monroe Doctrine for the 21st century, sometimes quite an extensive interpretation of what is their geography and what is their hemisphere, but a conscious molding of their engagement with international partners against that backdrop. We are seeing on the other part of the other side of the world an increasing confidence, self-confidence in the Chinese leadership and their focus on their region and their friends, almost in parallel with the renewed focus by the US administration. Somewhere in between we have Europe, and we could talk about some of the challenges that poses. Elsewhere we have middle powers, emerging powers, some long-term difficult countries, difficult powers trying to use security leverage in their region, whether that's Iran or North Korea, relevant to thinking about cybersecurity as well. But that geographical fragmentation is one of the trends that I think we have to keep in mind when we're thinking about these security issues. The other trend is increased competition, not only between the United States and China, but to a very large extent, I think it is the competition between the United States and China that is setting the framework for others. They have to bear that in mind when they're trying to identify their goals and objectives. That's certainly true for Europe. And that competition is happening across a series of themes and theaters. So obviously, information technology and AI, very relevant to our discussions today. Energy, increased competition for energy, partly linked to the huge energy needs of AI and data. I read somewhere, or I heard someone speaking the other day, about the extra energy needs in the United States over the next 5 years just to supply the planned data centers. An extra 67 gigawatts. One big nuclear power station, 1 gigawatt. Where are you going to find an extra 67 gigawatts of power in the next 5 years? And that's just in the United States. That is replicated across other regions. And that means that there is a serious competition linked to how you think about energy, with also here this United States-China tension, with quite clearly the United States reacting to what they perceive to be China's strength in renewables by refocusing on traditional carbon energy. And that has implications for all of us as well. The other frontier technologies, you've touched upon some of them. I'm thinking particularly of new frontiers, whether that is on Earth, with people thinking about how to exploit the Arctic, the Antarctic as they open up, the competition for rare inputs, including rare earths, very much in the news at the moment, but also other frontiers, including space, and the competition that is certainly growing around satellites and satellite communication. Defense and security as areas where there is real competition, not least to try and bind in other countries and partners in various different forms of alliance. And lastly, but by no means least, trade, capital flows, and currency, which we're seeing both as theatres of competition and of instruments of influence. I'm sure you've all been following what's been happening in the markets in the last days around US links with Argentina. So these different factors are shaping the way we need to think about security. And they pose some quite challenging questions for what Europe needs to do about its security.
Let's go to Europe, but let me make a question in two ways. What is the role of Europe? And second, does Europe, the Europe of security, include the UK?
So I'm tempted to say I wish. There's a phrase which sometimes sounds a bit sort of throwaway, but I think it has quite a lot of truth underneath it, which is if you're not at the table, then you'll find yourself on the menu. And Europe has a real challenge, I think, against the backdrop that I've just tried to sketch out. It has a sort of geographical challenge in that if there is an increasing sense of blocks, what is the Europe bloc and where does it find its place? And if there is this increasing pointed, difficult competition across some of these different areas, how does Europe get in the game, keep in the game, and hopefully have a sort of leading role in at least some of these fields? And I think there is a tension. It's a challenge, and at the moment it's a tension for Europe. Because on the one hand, those countries who are in the European Union rightly want to build on their strengths in the European Union, including their strengths in the single market, sometimes by reinforcing their cooperation amongst themselves. But they also want to do it with friends. They want to build alliances to try and manage some of these other big blocs, in particular the US and China. So we've seen a renewed sense of European diplomacy, reaching out across the world. I'm sure, dear to the debate here, the attempts to try and, after many years, close a deal with Latin America, the Mercosur deal. But also reaching out to Canada, Australia, Japan, Korea, various like-minded countries around the world. And within the neighborhood, also thinking about whether they can have a better relationship with like-minded countries, whether that's Norway, Switzerland, and the UK. The tension is the more you focus on doing stuff together as the European Union, the more difficult it can be also to reach out to your friends and neighbors, even near neighbors like the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, who, of course, must take responsibility for the situation they're in. They voted to leave the European Union. They, even with the new government that is much more keen to develop a relationship, to rebuild a relationship with the European Union, is still maintaining that it wants to stay outside the single market and the customs union, so is putting constraints on that relationship. Nevertheless, it seems to me that given the wider geopolitical pressures the shared challenges, and the common approach that these countries, including the United Kingdom and the European Union, have to trying to deal with some of these challenges, particularly in the field of security, it would be better if we did more together. And I regret that it's proving quite difficult to do more together between the United Kingdom and the European Union at the moment. It's not going fast enough. There's not, in my view, enough ambition on either side. So this is self-criticism of the UK side, but it is also, as I say to my former colleagues in Brussels, a criticism of the EU side as well. Even where there has been cooperation, for example, on Russia-Ukraine, where there has been good cooperation on support for Ukraine, thinking about how to put pressure on Russia, cooperation on sanctions, things like that. There are still some constraints when we think about the future and the need to build our resilience, not just our defense capabilities, but our wider economic security resilience. The dialogue is quite thin, and I regret that. So yes, it should include the UK, should be Europe in the widest possible sense of a family, but at the moment that ambition is not being fulfilled.
Okay, but maybe let's go to the relations with the US and the new administration, but maybe the US can be very helpful to make the UK and the European Union closer. How do you see this discussion about the strategic autonomy and the relations with the US in this new context?
So obviously it's a complicated relationship between Europe and, I'll talk about the EU and the US, and then we'll talk about Europe more generally, including the United Kingdom. Obviously it's a difficult relationship where the United States is seeking to not just take a lead in the relationship, which has been traditional and which we've managed to differing degrees of success over the decades, but to actually impose the terms of the relationship. I think that is posing difficulties internally in the politics in Europe. Different European countries have different perspectives on that. I think the closer you are to the conflict in Ukraine, the more you prioritize your defense and security objectives, and therefore you think that we must find a way of maintaining a working relationship with the Trump administration that includes defense and security. And if you're a bit further away from that, perhaps you balance that consideration more with other considerations, like the rather aggressive approach that the Trump administration have taken on trade and tariffs. So I think that debate is continuing. It's intertwined with different attitudes across Europe to Russia. Not only the current threat that Russia poses in Ukraine, but for some countries thinking further ahead, what happens, inshallah, the day when we've managed to settle conflict in Ukraine in terms of wider security in Europe and the future possible relationship between Europe and Russia. So those differences complicate the picture. For the United Kingdom, outside the European Union, with a long and strong traditional link to the United States, the successive governments have said that they don't want to choose. They want to be able to maintain a good relationship with the United States and rebuild a better relationship with the European Union. I think it's increasingly difficult in some areas to maintain, as it were, a neutral, balanced approach. Some of those problems aren't just unique to the United Kingdom. Some of those problems are posed for European Union countries as well. For example, on defense, the sharp end of strategic autonomy. It is increasingly challenging to think about how you balance the need to boost your defense now by buying stuff that you can get access to, often involving the United States or US companies, with the need to build your longer-term resilience, including the capabilities of your defense industry, which requires you investing in cooperation in Europe. I hope that would be cooperation including the United Kingdom. It's not quite agreed yet, but I hope that will be agreed, which is absolutely vital for the medium and longer term, but means that you won't be able to rely upon getting the necessary equipment immediately. And I think that is one of the examples of the need for a wider debate in Europe about the balance on defense and security. Now, there are also questions to do with technology, both AI, wider information technology, the data-based economy, and critical infrastructure in the way that you've described. And there's some similar tensions. How do you balance the need to build your own regional, European family resilience on the one hand, with the need to keep up with the rapid evolution of these technologies, which often rely upon US companies and US platforms? It's not exactly the same set of issues, but you can see there's a family resemblance between those issues. I don't know whether that's helpful. I'm describing a problem. I'm not describing any solutions yet. But I think that a wider debate about that and an admission that there are these tensions would be a good place to start.
That drives me to the next issue to put on this conversation, which is cyber attacks, hybrid attacks. What is the role that cyber war plays in this geopolitical context?
So there are some, I'd almost tempted to say, traditional bad actors in this field. And there are public reports that detail this, so we're not revealing any sort of state secrets. But in different ways, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea in particular, continue to be bad actors in the cyberspace who pose challenges to liberal democracies, including in Europe, in the European family. But in a way, the sort of, and you've already underlined this in the presentation of your report, that the dual challenge is the traditional bad actors continuing to be active, increasing in some respects their activity, combined with the increasing technology-based economy and civil society and everyday life that we all lead. So you have actors who are trying to cause disruption, sometimes active harm, and you have a much bigger, as they say in the jargon, attack surface, because so much of what we do is now in the cyber domain. You also have, and this is another element in the mix, which you've already referred to, increased cyber criminality. So you have, if you like, a kind of a proliferation problem. Some of the technology that used to be state technology or was in the hands of actors who were related, non-state actors, but closely related to state players, it is now more widely available. I don't just mean on the dark web. You can find it really quite easily. And that cyber proliferation, or the proliferation of tools that you can use to conduct cyber activities, is bringing loads of new, terribly entrepreneurial cyber criminal actors into this space, which is underlines just simply all of those factors, underlines the need for us to have a quantum jump in how seriously we take cybersecurity across our economies. But as well as all of that, I do think that we need to be honest and open about the need for private sector and public sector to work together against some of these bad actors. So in the UK, we've just produced a report by the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is a little bit like the Cyber Institute that the Secretary was just referring to, that has reported on some of the Chinese activities over the last year, including attempted interference in critical national infrastructure. That remains a big issue. Russian activities, particularly the spread of malware, Iranian activities, activities of North Korea, including, and this I think was quite striking, North Korea's support for individuals who were posing as IT experts who were going to help businesses improve their IT security. They were, in fact, disguised agents of North Korea who were doing quite the reverse. So in addition to all this, an increasing cybercriminality elements, we still have state actors that we need to counter.
Yeah, let me highlight one of the things that you said is that the level of innovation of cyber criminals is amazing. It's amazing. They are sophisticated. They use the last technology, etc., etc.
Well, I was struck on one of your positives and negatives lists. You had AI as a positive, which I like, and it's certainly true that AI is going to help in thinking about improving defense and security. And I'm sure we're going to hear a bit more about that in some of the subsequent sessions. But I'm afraid the flip side is also true. AI is at least as much being used by those who want to cause us harm, not just state actors and actors close to states, but also by entrepreneurial cyber criminal actors who are using it to massively scale up some of the things that they can do. So it used to be that individual cyber criminals would be, steam-driven, trying to type in their attacks at against different targets, and it could take quite a long time. And that allowed some private sector actors to sort of take a risk, if you like. Maybe there'd be one company in 100 that would be affected by a cyber attack, so 99 not, so maybe I don't have to worry about it. That's gone. With a number of techniques, including those that are now AI-enabled, the possibility of mounting an attack and then scaling it to anybody who's got an email address means that you can't rely on being one of the companies that isn't going to be attacked. Completely changes the way you have to think about this.
Julian, you are now at Flint, working a lot with companies in this field of the cyber risk and cyber attacks for political or geopolitical reasons. How do you transmit to business and companies how this geopolitical risk is affecting them?
I mean, the individual sectors, individual industries, you have to think about it slightly differently. But the main point, I think, is that you can no longer afford to be reactive. One of your slides underline this already. Given the pace, the scale, the volume, the rate of evolution and change of the challenges, both the big geopolitical challenges, but also as those funnel down to specific cybersecurity challenges, it's no good just thinking about what you're going to do after you suffer an attack, or how do you defend against a repeat of the same attack. You have to be much, much, much more proactive, which means, and you've used the words already, thinking much more creatively about how you build your resilience, reduce your dependencies, and ensure not only the integrity of your operations, but the integrity of those that you work with. Some of the biggest cyber attacks in the United Kingdom over the last year have been supply chain sourced attacks, as you know. In shops, Marks and Spencer's and the co-ops, so widely used shops, and most strikingly, recently, Jaguar Land Rover, one of the leading car producers in the United Kingdom. Jaguar Land Rover is estimating that the cost to their business of having to close down because of the cyber attack that they have suffered is going to be somewhere over £2 billion. That is an enormous sum of money which would wipe out most businesses. Indeed, even Jaguar Land Rover are going to have some difficulties. They've had to have a government-supported loan in order to think about how they're going to manage this. So not only the integrity of your business, but the integrity of the relationships that you have with your supply chain and the underlying infrastructure that you rely upon. And that is true, is always true for sectors like financial services, to an extent transport, but it's now also true for data, energy, health, defense and security companies in that sphere, and I would say increasingly democracy. Those parts of our political structures that we rely upon to maintain an open, liberal society and a level playing field for our businesses. So the challenge is big.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on which are the sectors with bigger exposition to geopolitical risk?
So I will have a go at that, but I think that there's a risk of a trap of nostalgia there, which is your analysis is based on which sectors have been attacked in the past, and I'm not sure that is necessarily the only or even the best guide to what are the exposures in the future, because the bad actors now have the means to try new things, as we've been seeing with some of the supply chain attacks. But I think that the sectors that traditionally have been exposed and have therefore thought about this a lot and where we can learn from them, and no doubt we've got representatives of those sectors here today, are the financial services sector that was one of the leading drivers in the United Kingdom of thinking about this, key infrastructure, so energy, other critical national infrastructure, transport, increasingly, and I don't think this is just in the United Kingdom, public services that hadn't had enough investment in their cyber infrastructure. So health has been a common target because it was perceived to be weak, and actually it was open to being held hostage, and we've seen quite a lot of ransomware attacks there. And supply chain, down flow supply chain supports to those sectors and critical sectors like security and defense. And I think that that's why you need to promote this debate, it's why you need to promote a wider debate about a cybersecurity culture, because you can't just rely upon, even though it's very important that each business that feels it might be exposed has a proper plan led by the board, work through its entire business. You have to also have these conversations between businesses and between sectors, otherwise you will have your bad actors find a weak link.
And considering companies individually, which are the main challenges, the specific challenges for companies to face this challenge and this risk?
So you've indicated some of them already, but in no particular order, I would say you need to start with the board level and leadership. You then need to have both across your business. Obviously, this is easier for bigger businesses than smaller businesses, so all of these challenges become a little bit sharper for SMEs. But across your business, you have to have both an awareness of these issues and some training and testing of how you build your resilience. And then you need to have a dialogue across your sector and with your suppliers in order to try and reduce your exposure, in order to at least be aware of what the dependencies might be, and hopefully, through spreading these discussions, encourage some of those suppliers to increase your defenses by being better themselves. As I say, I think for big companies, this is becoming more normal. But for small and medium-sized businesses, it's a bigger challenge. this is where the public for me, this is where the public sector can come in and play a role, because it can help and support. We heard some of that from one of the earlier speakers, but in the UK, the government is providing not only, as it were, government-style support to counter the larger bad actors, but also increasingly support to business all the way down through the supply chain, including to small and medium-sized businesses, to help them to shoulder the burden of taking cybersecurity seriously. And that can be technical support. In some cases, it's essentially financial support. It's funding schemes that allow those businesses to use those schemes, whether it's vulnerability testing, vulnerability mapping, or in some cases, actual active training of people from small and medium-sized businesses to improve their security. So I think there is a big, as I said at the start, I think there's a big role for the private sector, but there's a need for private sector, public sector cooperation.
Yes, we think that this is probably one of the big black holes that we have in cybersecurity in the business community. And I think that many times our experience shows that the first problem is to convince them that they have a problem of cybersecurity. Because in SMEs, the level of awareness is very, very low. And sometimes it's difficult to make them aware that they have to take measures and trying to consider themselves as a potential target for a cyber attack.
I can understand if you're an SME in a sort of non-strategic sector.
Yeah.
Imagine you're an SME to do with dental health.
Yes.
You might think that I'm a non-strategic sector, I'm not going to be a target. You know, neither China, Russia, Iran, or the North Korea are actually going to even know that I exist. But because of this problem of proliferation and the radical inventiveness of cyber criminals, bad actors, learning lessons, including from some of those big state actors, and then applying them for profit, I don't think it's safe anymore to imagine that you'll be one of the 99 companies out of 100 that might not be attacked. Because it's not just the multiplication of the big attacks, big incidents, which, again, in the latest report by the National Cybersecurity Center, have increased, have more than doubled in the last year. Big incidents, they call them, they categorize them as incidents of national significance, went up from about 90 to over 200 in a year. So they've more than doubled in a year. It's not just those, it's a trickle down of those big incidents through each layer and level of the economy. And you simply can't say that it doesn't concern me anymore.
Yeah. So we have 5 more minutes to take, if any, questions from the audience. I don't know if there is any question. There is here one. It can be in English, of course, but in Spanish too.
Yes, we had already a case in Spain of a large data breach from the tax authorities.
Uh-huh.
And now my data has been sold in the deep web. So as a public official, if something happens to me, I would like to say, what would be your suggestion? How can I be protected? Or because, you know, the tax authorities, it's sorry, yeah, I gave you my data, but hello, it's not my fault. And I'm the weakest. It's not even a small company, the citizen. I'm the weakest link. So
Yeah.
any suggestion how to protect small citizen?
This comes right down to the level of the citizen, obviously. And it's very often it touches the citizen because their data is leaked. If you shared your data with a private company and that company is hit, you can imagine although they're very rare, a discussion with that company about the measures, including potential compensation, that might be involved. It's very complicated, and don't hold your breath. But if it's the state where, with no choice, you've been sharing your data because it's your tax returns, then I think that the only immediate resort is to redouble the popular calls for the state to be much more serious about its cybersecurity. That there is no way, I'm afraid, that we can stop sharing data, actually with private companies either, because unless you're going to become a hermit, or indeed with the public sector. So we have to redouble our call as citizens for the public sector to be much more serious about its cybersecurity. It's an inadequate answer, I know, but that is the reality. I'm hopeful in the sense that the more this touches individuals, the more there will be a popular swell of opinion that this isn't some far-off thing that might concern defense contractors. It is something that touches all of us, and therefore the governments are bound to take it more seriously. And I think that, I don't want to get into any controversial areas with you, because I think this is a fantastic program that you're pursuing. But I'm struck that when I was in the Commission in Brussels, one of the things that I was asked to do was to work with European partners, including at that time the UK, to be more serious about thinking about the risks connected with Chinese integration in our critical infrastructures, in particular in the 5G, but not just. And we managed to develop a debate across Europe about the risks and different measures that could be taken to mitigate the risks. It was difficult because one of the drivers for this debate was US pressure. So we go back to the earlier part of this conversation. US pressure can have, I think, positive outcomes. I would say it's had a positive outcome on defense and defense expenditure. Again, I don't want to get into a difficult subject, but across Europe, it's had a positive outcome. It can also generate a reaction. And the US pressure around, particularly bearing down on Huawei, caused some countries to say, yes, we really need to do this, and caused other countries to say, well, hold on a second, US, you haven't spent all the money on this tech, you haven't got very much of this tech, it's all right for you to get out of it, what about us? We have a much more complicated situation. But we did come to an agreed recognition of the risks and an agreed set of measures for mitigating the risks, including gradually winding down exposure to too much exposure and too much dependency to Chinese suppliers. I think that was the right approach, the right decision, and I'm glad, even though it's taken quite a long time, that most countries have moved in that direction. But there are some governments who've moved in a different direction. And I just think that, returning to your question about what can people do as citizens, they can raise questions about that.
Okay, so we have time for a short question, if any. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm Pilar from the Internet Governance Forum. And I was wondering, because we mentioned a lot on the collaboration between sectors, between companies, but we've also talked about the fragmentation of the single market in Europe. I'm not just thinking about fragmentation because member states are looking for their own competitiveness and their own position in the global scale, but also there are like language barriers and cultural barriers. So how can we bypass that to improve this collaboration?
There are all sorts of challenges. It's a different debate, which would take a long time. There are all sorts of challenges with giving effect to greater collaboration across the single market in Europe, and that's a pressing concern for economic and development reasons as well as security reasons. I think that for security, there's an extra added challenge which we've touched upon, which is the need to cooperate amongst like-minded countries. So you mustn't close within the single market to the exclusion of working and learning from other countries. Obviously, I've got a particular perspective on that because I think there should be greater collaboration in this area between the UK and the EU. And indeed, again, a tiny bit of history. In the 4 years following the Brexit vote, so UK had voted to leave but hadn't left yet, there was an enormous amount of cooperation between the UK and the EU on security issues, and particularly on cybersecurity issues. The first cybersecurity strategy that we produced in the EU was very closely modelled on a number of national strategies, including the UK strategy. I'm afraid that collaboration has tailed off a bit, and I think we need to revive it and give it new energy. But amongst EU member states, there are examples of positive collaboration and cooperation, including effective regulation. One of the subjects on your discussion today is NIS, which has been through various iterations. On the whole, I think that has been a positive contribution to improving the debate about the consciousness of and the need to develop a cybersecurity culture. But you need to be careful how you regulate in this area in order to avoid a situation where you're slowing things down because you're making them more complicated. So I would say on the whole, the EU has been a positive force, but there are some risks. It can overcomplicate things, it can slow things down, and it can create barriers to cooperation, sometimes between member states, but certainly between member states and other like-minded countries, that actually mean you miss opportunities to better cooperate together and to improve the situation. So I'm not at all preaching a sort of anti-EU, anti-single market agenda, but I think you need to do it intelligently and with an awareness of the possible disadvantages. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So time is up. Thank you, Julian, for being here. Has been, I think, that very, very interesting, everything that you said. And please join me in applause to